Is this live now? Is this live now? All right. Here's the book. Natsume Soseki is the author. The title of this book is called Kokoro. I'm usually do 30 minutes of reading. It's 11:55 p.m. So I mean I should be in bed right now, but I think the plan is I'm just gonna read until I feel kind of sleepy. So it might be 30 minutes, it might be less than 30 minutes, it might be more than 30 minutes. Chapter 42. In mid-August, I received a letter from one of my friends saying that a certain middle school in the provinces had an opening for a teacher and asking me if I would like to take it. This friend was himself actively searching for such a position from financial necessity. The offer had originally been directed to him, but he had found a position in a better part of the country, so he'd kindly offered it to me. I quickly sent back a refusal saying that a number of other people we knew were doing their best to find teaching positions, and he should offer it to one of them. After I sent the letter, I told my parents about it. Neither seemed to object to the fact that I had declined the offer. There will be other good jobs. You don't need to go off to a place like that, they both said. Behind these words, I read their exaggerated expectations for my future. Unthinkingly, they seemed to assume I would be able to find a position and salary far above what I could hope for as someone freshly graduated. It's actually very difficult to find a decent position these days, you know. I'm in a different field from my brother, remember, and we're different generations. Please don't go assuming it will be the same for me as for him. But you must at least get yourself some independent means now that you're graduated. Or it makes things awkward for us, too, my father said. How do you think I'd feel if people asked, "What's your son doing now that he's through university?" And I couldn't reply. He frowned unhappily. His view of life was firmly confined to the little world where he'd spent his life. Inquisitive locals had been asking him how much a salary a graduate could expect to earn, guessing at princely sums of around 100 yen a month. That made him uncomfortable, and he very much wanted to get me settled into a position that would save his face. My own point of view, based as it was on the great cosmopolitan world of Tokyo, made me seem to my parents as bizarre as someone who walked upside down. Even I found myself, on occasion, considering myself this way. My parents were so many light years from my own position that I couldn't begin to confess what I really thought. So I held my tongue. Why don't you go to the sensei you keep talking about and ask for his assistance? My mother suggested. This is surely the very moment he could help. These were the only terms in which she could comprehend sensei. But this was the man who had urged me, when I got home, to ensure that I got my share of the property before my father's death. He was hardly likely to try to find me a position. What does your sensei do for a living? My father inquired. He doesn't do anything. I thought I had told them this long ago. Surely my father remembered. So why doesn't he do anything, eh? I'd have thought someone you respect so much would be in a profession. My father was gently taunting me. To his way of thinking, useful people must be out in the world, engaged in something suitably impressive. There you are, he was insinuating. The fellow's worthless. That's why he's lazing about doing nothing. Look at me, now. I don't get a salary, but I'm far from idle, you know. I remained silent. If he's as fine a person as you say, he'll surely find you a position, my mother said. Have you tried asking? No, I replied. Well, what's the good of that? Why won't you ask? Go on, just write a letter at least. I replied vaguely and stood up. Hi, Andrew. Chapter 43. My father was clearly afraid of his illness, yet he wasn't the type to plague the doctor with difficult questions when he came to visit. For his part, the doctor kept his opinions to himself and made no pronouncements. My father was apparently giving some thought to what would happen once he died, or at any rate, he was imagining the posthumous household. Posthumous household. Giving your children an education has its good and bad points, I must say. You go to the trouble of training them, and then they don't come home again. It seems to me an education is the easy way to split up a family. Thanks to my brother's education, he was living far away, and my own education had resulted in my decision to live in Tokyo. My father's grumblings were perfectly understandable. He must certainly have been feeling forlorn at the thought of my mother left all alone in this big old country house they'd lived in so long together. My father was of the firm belief that there could be no change in the house, and that my mother would remain there until the day she died. The thought of leaving her to live out her lonely existence in this echoing shell of a place filled him with anxiety. And yet he was insisting I find a job in Tokyo. I found this contradiction rather funny, but it also pleased me, since it meant I could go back to live in the city. In their company, I was forced to pretend that I was doing my very best to look for a job. I wrote to Sensei explaining the situation at home in great detail. I asked if he could recommend me for any position, and I assured him that I would be happy to do whatever was in my power. As I wrote, I was aware that he was unlikely to take any notice of my request, and that even if he wished to help me, he lacked the contacts to be able to do so. But I did think that the letter would at least elicit a response from him. Before I sealed it, I said to my mother, I've written to Sensei, just as you wanted. Here, have a look. As I'd anticipated, she didn't read it. Have you? Well then, be quick and send it off. You should have done this long ago, without having to be told. She still thought of me as a child, and indeed I still felt like one. But a letter by itself isn't enough, I said. Nothing will happen unless I'm there in person. I really ought to go back to Tokyo around September. That may well be true, but you never know what fine offer may come up in the meantime. So it's best to put in an early request. Yes, I replied. Anyway, I'll tell you more when Sensei's answer comes. He'll certainly reply. I was in no doubt that he would. Sensei was a meticulous man. I waited expectantly for a letter from him, but I assumed wrongly. A week passed, and still nothing arrived. He must have gone off somewhere to escape the summer heat, I told my mother. Forced to defend him with some explanation. This justification was intended not only for her, but for myself. I needed a hypothesis that would somehow justify Sensei's silence to spare myself a growing unease. From time to time, I forgot my father's illness and felt inclined to escape back to Tokyo early. My father himself forgot that he was ill, in fact. Anxious, though, he was about the future. He made no moves to deal with the problem. Time passed, and I found no opportunity to bring up the matter of the division of property with him, as Sensei had advised. Chapter 44. When September arrived, I was impatient to return to Tokyo. I asked my father if he would continue to send money for a while, as he had for my studies. While I'm here, you see, I can't find myself the position you say I should, I said. This was my explanation to him for returning to Tokyo. Of course, I added, he need only send the money until I found myself a job. Privately, I felt that such a thing was unlikely to actually come my way. My father, on the other hand, knew nothing of actual circumstances and firmly believed the opposite. Well then, it's only for a short while, so I'll see what I can do, but not for long, you understand. You have to get yourself some good work and become independent, you know. You really should not have to rely on anyone from the day you graduate. Young people these days seem just to know how to spend money and never think of how to make it. He had various other things to say on the subject as well, including, in the old days, children fed their parents, but these days they devour them. I heard him out in silence. When his lecturing seemed to have run its course, I stood quietly to leave. He asked me when I was planning to go. The sooner the better, as far as I was concerned. Ask your mother to find an auspicious day in her almanac, he said. I will. I was extraordinarily meek with him. I hoped to be able to leave without having to stand up to him, but he held me back. We'll be lonely when you're gone, with just the two of us here. It would be fine if I were well, but as things stand, there's no knowing what might happen when. I did my best to console him and returned to my desk. Sitting among my jumble of books, I thoughtfully turned over in my mind my father's unhappy words and what lay behind them. As I did so, I heard again the cicada song. This time it wasn't a continuous shrill, but the intermittent call of the cicada known as a Susukuboshi, which sings toward the end of the summer. In past summers, when I had been home, I had often tasted a strange sadness as I sat quietly in the midst of the seething cicada song. This sorrow seemed to pierce deep into my heart along with the piercing insect cry. Always at such times I would sit alone and still, gazing into myself. Since returning home this time, the sadness had undergone a gradual change. As the summer cicada's strident song gradually gave way to the more hesitant call of the Susukuboshi, the fates of those around me also seemed to be slowly turning through the great karmic wheel. As I pondered my father's lonely words and feelings, I thought of Sensei, from whom I had received no reply. Since Sensei and my father seemed exactly opposite types, they easily came to mind as a pair through both association and comparison. I knew almost everything about my father. When we parted, the emotional bond between parent and child would be all that remained. Of Sensei, on the other hand, I still knew very little. I had had no chance to hear from him the promised story of his past. Sensei was, in a word, still opaque to me. I could not rest until I had moved beyond this state and entered a place of clarity. Any break in relations with him would cause me anguish. I asked my mother to consult the almanac and fixed on a date for my return to Tokyo. Chapter 45. It was almost time for me to leave. It must have been my second to last evening at home. When my father had another fall. I was tying up the wicker trunk packed with my books and clothes. My father had just gone into the bathroom. My mother went in to wash his back, then cried out to me. When I rushed in, my naked father was slumped over, supported from behind by my mother. By the time we brought him back into his room, however, he was declaring that he was all right. Nevertheless, I sat by his pillow, cooling his forehead with a damp towel until 9 o'clock, when I finally got up to eat a light supper. The next day, my father was in better shape than expected and insisted on getting up to go to the toilet himself, despite our protests. "I'm fine again," he announced, repeating the words he had spoken to me the previous winter, after he had had the first fall. At that time, he had indeed been more or less fine, and I hoped that the same would prove to be the case this time. But the doctor cautioned us to be careful, and even when we pressed him, he would say nothing more definite. Because of this fresh anxiety, when the day of my departure arrived, I no longer felt inclined to go. "Should I stay a bit longer just to see how it goes?" I said to my mother. "Yes, please do," she begged me. My mother, who had been unconcerned as long as my father could still go out into the garden or the backyard, now overreacted in the opposite direction and was consumed with worry. Wasn't this the day you were going back to Tokyo?" my father inquired. "Yes, but I've put it off for a while," I told him. "Is it because of me?" he asked. I hesitated. If I said it would only confirm that he was seriously ill. I didn't want to unnerve him. But he must have read what was in my heart, for he said, "That's a shame for you," and turned away to face the garden. I went back to my room and looked at the wicker trunk abandoned there. It was securely fastened, ready to leave at a moment's notice. I stood vacantly before it, wondering whether to untie the straps. I spent 3 or 4 days in a state of awkward suspension, like one half risen from his seat to leave. Then my father had another fall. The doctor ordered absolute rest. "What will we do?" my mother murmured to me, in a voice hushed so that my father would not hear. She looked miserable. I got ready to send telegrams to my brother and sister, but my father was experiencing almost no pain. The way he talked, he might have been in bed with no more than a cold, and he had an even better appetite than usual. He was disinclined to listen to the warnings from those around him. "Since I'm going to die, I intend to die eating tasty food." These words struck me as both comic and tragic. After all, he was not in the city, where really tasty food was actually to be had. In the evening, he asked for strips of persimmon-flavored rice cake, which he munched on with relish. "Why should he hanker so? He must surely still have quite a strong spirit," said my mother, groping in her despair for anything positive. Interestingly, to refer to his desire for food, she was using an old expression that was once specifically associated with illness. My uncle paid my father a visit, and as he rose to leave, my father held him back, loath to let him go home. He said it was because he was so lonely, but he also seemed to want to complain to someone about how my mother and I weren't giving him enough to eat. Good evening. Really like your recent video. Hi, Touchy. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Chapter 46. My father's condition remained unchanged for over a week. During that time, I sent a long letter to my brother in Kyushu and asked my mother to write to my sister. I had a strong feeling that these would probably be the last letters detailing to them my father's state of health. Our letters included the information that we would telegram when the time came, so they should stand ready to come at short notice. My brother was in a busy line of work. My sister was pregnant. Neither was in a position to be called until my father was in evident danger. On the other hand, it would be awful if they were asked to make the journey only to arrive too late. I felt a private weight of responsibility about exactly when the telegram should be sent. I couldn't give you a precise answer on that, but you must understand that the danger can arise at any time, said the doctor, who had come from the nearby railway station. I talked it over with my mother, and we asked him to arrange for a nurse from the hospital to be hired. When my father laid eyes on this woman, who arrived at his bedside in a white uniform to greet him, he had a peculiar expression on his face. My father had long known that he was mortally ill. Nevertheless, he was unaware that death was now fast approaching. When I'm well again, I might take another trip to Tokyo, he remarked. Who knows when you'll die? You have to do all the things you want while you're alive to do them. My mother could only respond with, I hope you'll take me along when you go. But sometimes he grew deeply dejected. Do make sure to take good care of your mother when I die, he said to me. His "when I die" evoked a certain memory. That evening after my graduation, when I was preparing to leave to Tokyo, Sensei had used the same phrase several times in the conversation with his wife. I remember Sensei's smiling face as he spoke, and his wife blocking her ears against the inauspicious words. The words had been merely hypothetical then, but now they rang with a certainty that sometime soon they would be fulfilled. I could not emulate Sensei's wife's response, but I did need to find a way of distracting my father from his thoughts. Let's hear you talking a bit more optimistically. Didn't you say you'd take a trip to Tokyo when you were well again? I asked. With Mother. You'll be amazed when you see it next, at how it's changed. The streetcars, for instance, there are all sorts of new routes now. And once streetcars go into a neighborhood, of course, the whole look of the area changes. And the city divisions were recently revised. There's not a moment, day or night, when Tokyo stands still. My tongue went prattling on out of control while he listened contentedly. The presence of an invalid meant that there were a lot more comings and goings at the house. Every few days, one or another of the relatives called to visit my father. Among them were some who lived farther away and were normally not in close contact. One remarked as he left, I was wondering how he'd be, but he seems quite well. He talks without effort, and I must say, to look at his face, he hasn't lost a bit of weight. The household, almost too quiet for comfort when I first arrived, was now filled with increasing bustle and activity. My father's illness was the one thing that stood still in the midst of all this coming and going, and it was slowly growing worse. After consulting with my mother and uncle, I finally sent off the telegrams I had prepared. My brother replied that he would soon be there, and my sister's husband replied similarly. Her previous pregnancy had ended in a miscarriage, and her husband had already intimated that they were taking particular care that it wouldn't become the pattern, so he would probably come in her place. All right, chapter 47. Amid all this unrest, I nevertheless found time to sit quietly. Occasionally, I even managed to open a book and read 10 pages or so before I was distracted. The trunk I had packed and closed had been reopened, and I retrieved things from it as the need arose. I reviewed the schedule of study I had set up for myself back in Tokyo. I had not achieved even a third of what I had hoped to do. The same depressing thing had happened numerous times before. It's true, but rarely had my study gone less according to the plan. Than this summer. I tried telling myself that this was probably simply the way it goes, but nevertheless, my sense of failure oppressed me. Huddled unhappily in self-castigations, I also thought of my father's illness. I tried to imagine how things would be after his death. And this thought brought another, the thought of Sensei. At both ends of the spectrum of my misery were poised the images of these two men, so opposite in social standing, education, and character. Once when I left my father's bedside and went back to my room, my mother looked in and found me sitting alone, arms folded amid my jumble of books. "Why not take a nap?" she suggested. "You must be a bit exhausted." She had no comprehension of how I felt, nor was I childish enough to really expect her to. I simply thanked her. However, she continued standing in the doorway. "How's father?" I asked. "He's having a good sleep," she replied. Suddenly, she stepped into the room and came and sat beside me. "Has anything come from Sensei yet?" She had believed me when I assured her there would be a reply, but even when I was writing to him, I had had no expectation that he would send the kind of reply they were hoping for. In effect, I had knowingly deceived her. "Write to him again, will you?" she urged. I was not inclined to begrudge the effort of writing any number of useless letters if it would comfort my mother. But having to press Sensei on this matter was painful. I dreaded earning his scorn far more than being scolded by my father, or hurting my mother. I already suspected that his lack of response to my previous letter bespoke precisely that reaction from him. "It's easy enough to write a letter," I said, "but this isn't the sort of matter that gets solved through the mail. I have to go to Tokyo and present myself in person." "But with your father the way he is, there's no knowing when you can go to Tokyo." "Exactly. I'll be staying here till we know what the story is, whether he gets better or not. That goes without saying. Who on earth would leave someone as ill as he is and take off to Tokyo after all?" My first reaction was pity for my innocent mother, but I couldn't understand why she would choose this hectic moment to bring up the problem. Was there something in her makeup that was equivalent to the oddly casual way I could forget my father's illness and sit calmly reading? Something that allowed her to temporarily forget the invalid in her care and concern herself like this with other matters? As this thought was crossing my mind, my mother spoke. "Actually," she said, it's my belief it would be a great comfort to your father if you could find yourself a position before he died. The way things are going, it may be too late, but really, the way he talks shows he's still quite aware of things. You should be a good son and make him happy while you still can." Alas, the situation prevented me from being a good son, and I wrote no more to Sensei. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop here for today. I'm 100 pages in, so making good progress. And I'm freaking starving right now, so I need to go eat something. But I do plan to read tomorrow, sometime tomorrow. It'll be sometime around anywhere between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m., something like that. I don't know. But I will read sometime tomorrow. Alrighty.